One. All right, welcome to the Insight Cafe. I'm your host, 𝗔𝗯cie, and today, I have my one of my teachers, Joe Bailey, who is an amazing three principles teachers, and we met on Michael Niels's Super Coach Academy, and you were teaching a grounding session, and it was a really profound session because I'm going to read your bio in a second, but I need to tell this story. You're the first person who helped me to almost like put a speedometer on my thinking. Because prior to that, I just thought I had a lot of thinking, but I didn't make that connection between the speed of thinking, because one of your favorite books that I love and I give to all my clients is Slowing Down in the Speed of Life. And in that book, you talk a lot about slowing down your thinking. And when you do slow down, that's where all the good stuff is. But today, well, actually, I'm going to read your bio first because to give people context to how amazing I think you are. So you are a licensed clinical psychologist for over 40 years, and you've helped pioneer a new paradigm of resilience called the three principles of psychology. And those who have learned this new understanding of resilience develop an inner compass that enables them to live in the eye of the hurricane, even the most challenging of situations. And you've written 5 books, and they're available in 26 different languages, and they're available all over the world. And you've worked as a marriage and family counselor, university teacher, trainer, therapist, author, mentor, and consultant to organizations. And the rest of the bio is going to be in the description. So I've invited you to here today because I know you're releasing a new book called Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane, Unlocking Resilience in Turbulent Times. And I think now is a perfect time to be talking about that, given the Olympics who are pushing the boundaries of their physical limits, dealing with mental pressure, and also just the state of the world in general. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nikon. It's good to be with you in Thailand, one of my favorite countries in the entire planet. I absolutely love Thailand. And I've been
Thailand
there
already
twice.
loves you. Bonus points for loving Thailand. So I'd like to jump right into it because I think, especially in the personal development world, the words thriving are thrown around a lot. And I'd love to start off by hearing, what does thriving mean to you?
So I think as a clinical psychologist, the best I could really offer people before I understood the three principles insightfully was how to cope
Mm,
with stress, how to cope with their damagedness, their brokenness from past traumas or psychological diagnoses. And that was really the best that psychotherapy had to offer, was really helping to understand what caused my symptoms, where it came from, do a lot of research going back into the past, and then hopefully through that process of reliving it and understanding it, you wouldn't feel so bad about it. It almost, the byproduct, the negative byproduct of that, people began to identify with their labels, with their diagnoses. And so it kept us kind of stuck in a mindset that we would always have this. We would always be alcoholic, neurotic. Oops, sorry. Forgot about that. Part of the hurricane. uh, and and just having the identification with us as being a problem, having an illness, kept that thinking going and perpetuated. So the three principles understanding posits a completely different assumption, and that is that we're all innately resilient, that can't be broken or damaged in any way. And just hearing that, my clients, my students get this huge relief from that they are not their illness, they are not their diagnosis, they are not their past, they are not even their habits. Who they are is the consciousness and the wisdom and the essence of who they are that created all of this. And whatever we've created, we have another another second chance every moment to recreate our life going forward. So thriving is more than coping. It is living in the moment. It is being present. It is being able to roll with the punches, to adapt and change and recreate as we go through these challenging times with the coronavirus, the other pandemics, just the implications of that for the world economy and what it's done to trade and the international community, even interpersonal relationships. We've become more polarized in the age of Facebook and the internet. We're kind of at each other. So this book is like a vaccine. Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane is, for me, is like a vaccine to inoculate us against the mental illness, dis-ease of our times.
I love that. What I heard, and that was such a big, when I even know, what I love about these conversations is no matter how much you know, there's always more to see. And in your description of it, I saw more, and it was such a relief for myself. Feel like, oh wait, I am not my circumstances. And that's a hurricane, right? We're demonstrating it in the moment. And
that's another
yeah,
hurricane that's happening
another
in
hurricane. And I think what you're pointing, the premise you're pointing to, is so true. And I've experienced it too. It's like, to me, thriving used to be, well, I guess I'll thrive despite all this crap that I'm dealing with, and this is the best I can do. It was more coping. And now that you pointed it out, I see it better. And that is that when my thinking looks real enough to me, right? I want to try and cope with it because I don't see what's beyond it. And I'd love for you to share more about the hurricane, because I think that's what's kind of in the forefront of people's attentions, or what grabs their attentions the most, is the things that are going wrong. And it's what it looks like to me now is the big distraction that looks real enough for me to divert all my attention and resources to. And what I'm hearing from you is, because the hurricane looks so real, I'm kind of blind to my own thriving that's already innately there.
Yeah, the metaphor I use in the book is that it's thriving in the eye of the hurricane. And if you ever, I don't know if they get hurricanes in Thailand. I think they do.
Typhoons.
Typhoons, similar.
Yeah.
But a hurricane is more like a cyclone. It goes around and around at 220 to 275 miles per hour. So the winds of the hurricane are extremely destructive and, wipe out everything in its path. But in the center of the hurricane, there's a calm center they call the eye, and that's about 40 miles across. So in that, airplanes, climatologists fly into the eye of a hurricane, and it's completely still. There are birds flying around in there. It is not destructive. It is the calm center. And we as human beings, no matter how busy our minds get, no matter how stressed we get, no matter how much we are challenged in life with a physical illness, with dying. In my book, I go through many scenarios of people who have chronic illness, who have disease, who are living in poverty, who are in war, who are police on the front lines, people who are in that hurricane, who have found that they can tap into, access, live from that eye of the hurricane, which is where we are able to respond to challenges, to the turmoil, in a creative, insightful, productive, responsive way, rather than being so impacted on it that we're immobilized by our own thinking, that we get paralyzed by our thinking. And that in and of itself becomes more painful than the challenges. That becomes more destructive than the winds of the outer rim of the hurricane, because the internal damage that we do to ourselves is what prevents us from adapting, to changing, to creating a new way of doing business, a new way of interacting in our interpersonal relationships. And until we tap into that inner I, which I call resilience, that inner resource of resilience, or mental health would be another term for it, or well-being, or our spiritual essence, this creative force that we have. When we operate from that through an understanding of the principles, we can more often operate from that wisdom and that common sense instead of emotional reactivity in our habits. That we've all got habits. We all have an ego. We all have these habits of stress and worry and rumination and fear and anxiety that we've learned to think in that way, but we've learned to think in a way that is a misuse of mind. Not a use, but a misuse of mind, innocently. And I underline innocently. We all, if we had known better as young kids, we would have held on to that resilience. Because if you look at little kids, they are so resilient. They roll with the punches. They get upset and emotional, and they get over it quickly. They don't have prejudice. You have to learn to be prejudiced. You have to learn to hate. You have to learn to fear. Those are not built into us. And this book, Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane, is really just pointing people back to, first of all, that we are innately resilient. We have the I in us. It can never be destroyed. And secondly, the only thing that can suppress that natural immunity to stress is a misuse and a misunderstanding of how our mind works to create our emotions, our perceptions, and our behavior in our life. And so the principles, how we use the power of thought and just being conscious or aware that we're thinking in the moment, helps dispel the stress and the illusion of our thinking and brings us back to the calm eye of our wisdom and our resilience. So it's a paradigm shift, because in my 20s, I was director of prevention for the state of Texas. And we taught people coping skills and techniques and mechanisms for stress reduction. And, it was a very fun thing to do, but it didn't really last because you only felt good while you were doing the technique. And soon it would fade, and then you would quit believing in it. And it didn't really direct people back to their inner human potential, their inner resilience and wisdom, which is that eye of the hurricane.
As you were sharing, what occurred to me is something I just realized as you were sharing it, is that I guess for me, I think, like, I used to think my value was in how well I handled the hurricanes. And so my attention, instead of pointing inward to calm, it was, oh, look at this hurricane. Nikon's going to go take care of this hurricane because look how strong I am and look how capable I am of handling these hurricanes. And I realized I've seen a lot of my colleagues do that in professional sport. It's like, it was this premise of, like, you wouldn't, as a professional taekwondo player, you wouldn't feel so good winning an easy match. Like, you fought somebody really tough, then you'd come out stronger. And I think that premise, and you said it innocently, translates to how we relate to life is, oh, let me go handle this hurricane. And what you're pointing to is how the gold or the diamonds are actually in the center, in not going outward and handling it, but just sitting in the middle of it while this hurricane like kind of whirls around you. Like, that's where your power really is. That transcends difficult situations. And in your long career, I'd love for you to share perhaps case studies or stories of people you work with or situations you've seen have pivoted based on this work. And I know you said you have a few of those stories in your book as well. Like, which stories have perhaps inspired you the most?
Boy, there's so many. I just, as I said before we started this, I just got the proofs of my new book. And so for the last 3 days, I've been poring over each letter and each word of the document just to make sure it's all accurate. And I was so impacted by the stories just reading them again. And I have stories in the book about people who have been in literal earthquakes in Tibet. There's a woman named 𝗔𝗯ощ 𝗲𝗏 who I interviewed who talked about her story. So maybe I'll just tell that one first, because that's the first one that came to my mind. She was in charge of emergency preparedness in Nepal. And so she would work with Chamber of Commerce, the airport, the police and the fire departments, the school systems, all these different systems to give them protocols to prepare for an earthquake or plane crash or different tragedies. And she said she noticed that people in a crisis, if they lost their eye of the hurricane, if they lost their bearings, if they lost their center, they became very stressed, exhausted, and burned out, and they forgot their protocols. And so a lot of people died, and a lot of people innocently didn't do their job right because they got overwhelmed with their thinking, frightened by it. And so she looked on the internet, like you did, and searching for a solution, an answer to this. And she came across the three principles. And it was very different than all the other stress reduction techniques that she had observed on the internet. And she said there was one phrase that stuck in her mind. She didn't quite understand it all, but one phrase stuck in her mind. And the phrase was, "We are living in the feeling of our thinking always. We are living in the feeling of our thinking always." And that kind of stuck in the back of her mind. But it wasn't until the earthquake struck Nepal a few years ago, and she and her family were huddled in the living room of her grandfather's house. And the whole family, the kids, everybody was there because it was the safest house. And she and the other adults were, huddled in fear and waiting for the next tremor to erupt. And the little kids were playing. And they would be frightened when the tremor hit too. But as soon as it was over, they'd go back to playing. And it was quite a long, calm period. And the adults were all still, buzzing and afraid of what was going to happen and, thinking about the future. And she looked up at them and she said, "Can't you see? It's over." And when the little girl who was like 3 years old said that, it hit 𝗔𝗏 like another earthquake, she said. And that phrase, "we are living in the feeling of our thinking," came to the foreground. And she had an insight and realized it wasn't the earthquake that was frightening us. It was our thinking about the earthquake that was frightening us. And in that instant, she calmed down and she could see clearly what to do and how to be safer. And it changed her so much. She thought, I need to bring these principles to all the relief workers in Nepal who were having to go through the rubble and save people's lives and dig out the dead and on. And it took weeks, if not months, to do this. But because they were learning the three principles, they became more resilient. They were able to stay in the field longer. They didn't get burned out by it. They were able to be more in service and do their job. So this eye of resilience, clear-mindedness, insight in the moment, responsiveness to the needs of the moment, that's what resilience does for us. It also allows us to enjoy our life, to be happy, to not worry so much. And if we do worry, not worry so long.
Yeah.
Now, just the other day, I got in my own hurricane when I found out I had to have my proofs of my book back in 5 days. And I couldn't imagine how I could do it all in 5 days. And I just went into a panic and called my editor and said, "I can't do this. It's going to take at least a couple of weeks." She says, "Well, that's the deadline. You have to just live with it." And so the next morning I woke up and I thought, okay, I recognized that I was in my hurricane. It was my thinking that was, let me just take a look at it and how you use the program. And as I got into it, well, this is easy. What was I thinking? This is nothing.
Mm.
And in less than a day and a half, I'd gone through my entire book. So all of that stress I experienced in the moment, even though I know the principles, I get hit by hurricanes,
Yeah.
the unknown, the unexpected. But because I know what I know about how my mind works, I recognized where my stress was coming from more readily. Not immediately, I'm afraid I have to admit. But within maybe 24 hours, I realized it. And then when I calmed down, then I could see it totally differently. And it
Yeah.
was a piece of cake. It was nothing. And I ended up inspired by my own book, so grateful that for the opportunity. Can't wait to get this out to the world. This is going to help so many people. And it just shifted my whole psychological experience from hurricane to the eye, to that calm, to the resilience.
I
So
feel a
that's
lot, but I feel a lot better about my hurricanes because if Joe Bailey is still getting bugged out by hurricanes, I need to like give myself a break.
that's a really good point, Nikon, because knowing the principles and
Mm.
how the mind works doesn't make you unsusceptible to the vagrancies and the instability of the world and all the challenges that we face. We are human beings. We're going to experience our thinking. But because as you gain an understanding of how our mind creates our emotions, our perceptions, our physiological sensations, our stresses, the more readily we are able to rebalance, get our bearings back, and find our center in the present moment. But like as Sydney Banks, my teacher, mentor, said often, life is a contact sport. It's like
Mm.
Taekwondo.
Yeah.
You are going to get
Yeah.
kicked in the head.
Yeah.
You are going to get a gut punch. You are going to, but it doesn't matter how often you get hit. It's how you take the hit. So when you're in the term I would use in qigong terms, when you're in qi flow, when your qi is flowing and you take a hit, it just moves through you. It doesn't get stuck in a um, a break or an injury.
I have a story about that. Because I think I had some weird stuff going on with my hamstring and lower back. And I went to an acupuncturist, and they put the cupping, the Chinese
Yeah.
cupping
Yeah.
art, and he cupped, and then like did cup, and then like the cup thing happened, and there was like blood that comes out, and the doctor would wipe away the blood, and he was like, "Look, all this stuck blood," and I was like, "Ugh." Like what? Like what is happening? Why is there blood? And he described it very quickly. It's like, look, it's very simple. Where there's pain, it means things are not flowing. Okay, I'll see you next week. Bye. And I was like, okay. But like that part, when you said that, it reminded me of, oh, when you're not flowing, there's going to be disruption and pain.
Right.
And I think the new paradigm here is before there used to be so much efforting that had to go on to get out of pain, to get back to center. And what you're pointing to is it's what I'm seeing is a noticing that the center is always there.
Yeah.
Like you can't
Well,
have a hurricane without the center.
right, and the way this works in a practical way.
Mm.
Like anytime I have an emotional upset or whatever, I'm still feeling that thinking.
Mm.
My body is like the lights on the dashboard of your car. It's a signal to what's going on under the hood. How much gas is in the tank, how hot your engine is, battery's low, whatever. Your mind, your brain, whatever thought you're having in your brain, is sent through your central nervous system or the meridians if you're in Chinese medicine. It's an impulse that goes through, and it gives you sensation or emotion, energy in motion. And emotion is just energy in motion, the energy of thought in motion. Being aware that you're having a thought experience, when you connect it to your thinking rather than to what you're thinking about, it brings you back to a still point or a neutrality, or in Chinese medicine, to a qi flow. Your qi flows through the body and doesn't get blocked to create the injury or the pain or the symptoms. So this is almost like the three principles psychology in a way is like a psychological version of Chinese medicine, in that you're not treating the illness, you're treating the cause of it, which is the block of the qi. In this case, the block of positive thought, of positive healing thought, or insight. Inspiration is thought that comes from divine intelligence versus ego. The ego thinking just repeats the same patterns over and over again, just everything you've learned. But the universal intelligence of mind, or a divine intelligence, is infinite, and it's infinitely adaptable to any change in the world. So it comes up with creative solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems. So, for example, another story in the book, I have a whole chapter on communities of what we would call high-risk communities in the United States, communities of high poverty, high crime, high sexual abuse, physical abuse, violence, poverty, racism, etc. And the three principles have been brought into all kinds of communities all over our country and in other countries. But one country or one program in particular that I witnessed was Modelo, which was near Miami, and it had the highest crime rate in all of South Florida. And so Dr. Roger Mills, one of the early pioneers in the three principles psychology, decided to go into that community and just work with some of the people, teaching them the principles, and he called it leadership training for them. But it was really teaching them the principles. And those 5 women he initially worked with became leaders in the community, and all went back to school, got their kids going to school. Some of them ran for office politically, some became social workers, but they transformed that community to one that was completely controlled by the drug people, the drug dealers, and the violence went away, the drugs went away, and it was recognized by President Clinton back in the 90s. They came to the White House and got an award. It was on national television. Brian Gumbalt featured them on the Today Show, just talking how this community miraculously changed. The same thing has happened in many communities in the Bronx in New York, in Oakland, California, in Minneapolis, Des Moines, many other places in this country. We're just teaching these principles to people with high risk, high levels of mental health issues, addiction, and crime, transform themselves and then their community. So it's when people get back in touch with their resilience, they think better, they act better, they respond more creatively, they deal with adversity in a different way that leads to transformation and change rather than destruction and disease.
I love the Mandela story, and I love that you mentioned it and you shared about it, because on one of your podcast sessions that I listened to with Miss Beverly Wilson Hayes, and she's one of my favorite 3P characters and teachers. I think it's been since being in this community, that's what I've enjoyed the most, is when people are in their resilience, their energy has a certain flavor to it. There's just a joy to be around. It's so insightful. And I recently tried experiments where I'm curious to see when Nikon's in the space and he brings the space to other things, like being an entrepreneur in residence or being a content curator, just what happens. And the results have been fascinating. Just things come through me, and I just know things that are that even I'm like, oh, that was pretty interesting. Nikon, what else you got? And it's been really fascinating, this experiment. And also to relate to what you were saying before about how our personal thinking versus our true nature. And I think my mentor and teacher, Michael Neal, and I think your mentee, he would have this saying that really brought it home for me. It says, Nikon can have a really terrible day, but you're okay. And that just reminded me of what you said of like, Nikon can have a very interesting and terrible day, but you, who you really are, experiencing that, like, you're really okay. And like, as you said, like, I still go through hurricanes and I try and grab a hold onto it. Like, it's, but I'll have you to speak to that. I think, like, for me, I get when I feel overwhelmed, I often feel very lost. And despite being able to see this and know it, I still get disconnected from that space within. And what do you make of that?
Well, I think that's absolutely normal.
Yeah.
That's natural that you get disconnected from it.
Mm.
You know, and that's not a bad thing. You know, every time I go through a hurricane, I go through a challenge, an obstacle. I used to see it as, oh, I'm not getting the principles. What's the matter with me? I
I'm
thought I
supposed to
had,
know this stuff.
yeah, I'm supposed to know this stuff. Why am I having this reaction? And over time, as I looked back on my life, I could see every one of those missteps exposed a blind spot in my thinking.
Mm.
And it became an opportunity rather than self-judgment to just be aware of it. And in being aware of it, it almost like it put a spotlight on it, and I could begin to see that thinking more clearly, because prior to that, it was invisible to me.
Mm.
So, faltering, misstepping, making a mistake, uh, hitting a bump in the road, getting a challenge in life is actually always a hidden opportunity for deeper insight, for deeper realization of the truth of how life works. I do a lot of work with alcoholics and drug addicts. It's been my main focus of my clinical work. And, you know, with a lot of people who are recovering from addictions, be they drugs, alcohol, or sex, or pornography, or whatever it might be, they're the key to recovery of one's serenity and health is not that you don't have setbacks, times where you revert back to your old thinking, but every time you go through one of those downward spirals, to see that as a time to be open and aware, and not judge your experience, not judge yourself for it, but just be open and aware. What am I going to see this time? Being on the, sometimes the divine nature of life, the perfect nature of life, is that life creates circumstances for us to expose blind spots. And I don't know that it, maybe I'll say it a little different way. Whatever blind spots we have, which is invisible thinking, we will inevitably run into something that we can't see. And when that happens, we have psychological pain, hurt, guilt, shame, anger, frustration, disappointment, hopelessness, despair, etc. And when we have those feelings are there to wake us up, be conscious of where that feeling is coming from. It's coming from my thinking. And just seeing that as a possibility, and then accepting and being open to, what can I learn? What can I see here? Puts you in a different state of mind where you have a higher perspective. You're not so into your thinking. It kind of moves out, so you can, oh, no wonder I'm experiencing this. I'm overwhelmed, not because of the deadline I found out I had, because I imagined it was going to be a lot harder than it is. And then the truth was, I didn't know. But I went on prior editorial experiences, and this was completely different. And so I when I saw that, it 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 helped me to calm down and just say, okay, just forget all that and just see what you're dealing with in reality. And then I could see I had made up all kinds of things in my mind that weren't really true. I can do this. So
Yeah.
it's humbling. It humbles you. It makes you grateful for every time you can see your missteps, your misunderstandings, your mistakes. And when you can do that, it's like a really good. I'm watching the athletes in the Olympics this
Yeah.
last week. I'm glued to the TV. I just love the Olympics. And those that are able to be mindful during their experience, that they're so able to be focused on the event. And you could see those that are kind of caught up in their heads about it or over.
Right. You can feel it on through the screen. You can just know like, oh, this person's getting real tight. And if I can share, right, because go Thailand. Thailand won its first Olympic gold medal for Taekwondo. Her nickname's Tennis. Like weirdly, her nickname is Tennis, but her name is Panipak Patanakit. And I shared this with you before we started our talk, and how she posted a thing on Instagram that said, you know what? It's my second Olympic Games. Whatever happens, going to happen. I'm just here to enjoy the show. And throughout the whole games, you watched her compete and kick people in the face. She just had this feeling of just calmness about her that just allowed her to keep it together, especially in the gold medal round. And she won it. And you could tell the difference between the other top seeded players who lost out in the first rounds, where they were just so tight and so concerned because it was the Olympic Games. And they later shared in the interviews, like, I wish I had gone into this with a different mindset, which to me in our language speaks to, oh, you had some funny thinking going on. You were
Yeah,
competing at the games and you were competing in the hurricane at the same time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think I heard from a lot of athletes how many of them focus on mindfulness now,
Mm,
and the mental state is as important as the physical preparation and the training and the techniques and all that, the stamina and the muscle building and oxygenation and all the other
yeah.
things that they do. But the mindfulness part, which is being in the eye of the hurricane, there you are in the competition in the pool with 7 other swimmers,
Mm,
and you're just focused on your lane. You're not thinking about all of the rest. You're
right.
just on your every stroke. The American that won with 5 gold medals, the swimmer,
Caleb something.
Caleb
Dressel.
Dressel.
Yeah.
Yeah, Caleb Dressel. He's a drummer, and he says, "I'm in the drum beat when I'm
Mm,
swimming. I'm in it 2-2, or I know which beat I'm in, and I'm just focused on that. I'm
yeah.
just going with the beat."
And I think to speak to very real world consequences, I watched the 100-meter final for men, right? And I don't know if you watched it, but there was
Yeah.
the British player. He had a false start because he was so excited, and he was one of the expected to win guys, and he false started. What I didn't know
And they
was, if
kicked him
you're
off.
right, if you false start at the Olympic finals, you get booted. And I was like, whoa, you worked your entire life for this, for 10 seconds, an Olympic final, and you got excited and they booted you. I was like, wow,
Yeah,
like this stuff that we're talking about is really important, right? And it allowed the Italian gentleman to win by a length.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a book called Still Point that's written about the three principles, and there's a guy, uh, uh, Garrett Kramer, I think.
Still power, Garrett Kramer, right?
Still Power, yeah,
Right.
Garrett Kramer, and he's worked with PGA finalists in the,
Right.
from the Masters. I mean, he worked with the guy that won it a few years ago.
Yeah.
He's worked with hockey players and people from all different sports, teaching the same principles. So it really does. It's
Apply.
so clear in athletics. I know
Yeah.
I'm a skier, a downhill skier, and when I'm in the zone and I'm downhill skiing, it's like I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. I'm just enjoying the snow and the mountain and the view, and it's like magical. It effortless. But when I'm afraid, like, oh, I'm in a double black diamond. Oh my God! Oh, and I'm gonna fall. I know I'm gonna
Yeah.
fall. Every time.
I'd like to segue from, because while I have Joe Bailey on my podcast, one of my favorite things that you talk about ever is the magic carpet ride. And I'd love
Oh,
for you to share about that, because to me, this was another thing that you shared on it was the grounding session at the Super Coach Academy. And I've always been fascinated by it, because I'm still fascinated about that, because I was having a conversation with my colleague, Miriam, and we were sharing about how, is it just me, or is it like the better life gets, like the weirder life gets, because all these opportunities show up, and it's kind of like this, to me it feels like a loss of control, which was always my kind of hurricane, like. And to what I loved about the magic carpet ride, the way you share it, to me it's like you have to give up the way you think this is all going to turn out for where life just takes you. I'd love for you to share or talk to that.
well, I came up with that metaphor of the magic carpet ride in hindsight, looking
Mm,
back on my life, having learned the principles at age 33. And because a magic carpet isn't like a space,
right. There's no steering
or
wheel.
there's
Yeah.
no steering wheel. It's like you're going wherever it's taking you.
Mm,
And universal mind is that magic carpet. Universal intelligence of all things is that carpet. So and the ego is when you try to be like a little kitty, and when I was a little, or my son was little, he had a little seat next to me in the car, and it had a steering wheel on it. It wasn't connected to anything. It was just like he was pretending to steer the car, right? Well, in a way, we're kind of like kitties in our little kitty chairs, thinking we're controlling life with our steering wheel, and we're really not. It's just an illusion. But for me, looking back on my life, when I met Sid Banks, I was 33, and I was so burned out and stressed at that point, and couldn't keep a relationship, and um, always doing a million techniques to de-stress every day. My life was full of coping mechanisms. And when I met Sid, he just kind of exploded that whole paradigm in one night when I first listened to him. Just pulled the carpet out from all of my theories, my training. And he told me early on in my mentoring with him, he said, Joe, you'll be, because I just had a little practice in Minneapolis, and was kind of struggling with it. He said, you'll be traveling all over the world. You'll be writing books. You'll be teaching in universities. You'll be on the media. All this is going to change the entire world. This is going to change the whole way we do things. And I just thought he was crazy. I thought, you got to be. This is delusional. This is
like,
grandiose.
okay, Scottish guy from the mountains,
Just the guy with
Thanks.
no faith. Oh yeah, you don't really know what you're talking about. But in hindsight, everything he said happened. And I realized that everything I tried to make happen from my ego, from
Mm,
my willpower,
mm,
always, almost always failed. And everything that I would call successful was really luck. Things seemed to drop in my lap. They, because I was happy, I was lucky, happy go lucky. That saying. It just seemed like the happier I got, the more mentally healthy I got, the luckier my circumstances became.
Mm.
I fell in love with the love of my life. We've been married 39 years. The day I met Sid, I met her. Go figure.
Michael, I was so happy when I was on your podcast and I was like, oh my God, that's her. Like, that's her. That's the girl she talks about. Like, you know, a client gifted me a book out of the blue, and it was by a Swedish writer, I think. And it was like how the 100-year-old man who climbed out of a window and disappeared. And the whole book is a series of happy-go-lucky events that lead on to the next. And it's a great fiction book. And so this was a
I
little
love
bit of
that.
like a slap in my own face, because I just realized I've been trying to create my coaching practice out of my own ego. And
Yeah.
it frustrated the hell out of me. It does, or it did, because the things that I tried really hard to make work never did. But then it would take twists and turns where things would fall in my lap and it would just have a life of its own. And I'm just seeing that right now. I'm like, oh, that's why you're upset.
Yeah.
and and it's so nice to hear from you. It's almost like I needed someone to validate, like, it's actually okay, Nikon, you're doing okay. I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't look the way everybody else says it's supposed to look like. I'm like, of course it's not, because it's their life, it's not yours, And I think that's so.
It doesn't mean that you're
Yeah,
passive. I'm not.
right. Yeah.
You're motivated. You're inspired, but you're coming from inspiration that's not from your intellect or your ego. The inspiration that sometimes it comes from inside. Sometimes it comes from an opportunity coming to you and accepting it, and realize, even though you feel inadequate or you feel like, oh, I could never do that, life has presented it to you, and you just trust in the divine intelligence, the universal wisdom of all things. So for as one example, here I am, I'm just a master's level psychologist, and I happened to get a client referred to me who's a doctor for an intensive, and I did an intensive with him. It really changed his life and saved his marriage, etc. And then he got promoted to being the CEO of a very famous medical institution that's all over the world. And wow, that's interesting. And so I still continue to be his coach. And he said, I want to bring the principles to all the healthcare profession, starting with the Mayo Clinic. And I was like really intimidated, like, oh my, who me to speak to all of these world famous doctors? And I felt, but then this is what's happening. Just embrace it. And it just happened organically, but it felt like it fell into my lap. But it's just following the feeling. Sid would often say, follow the feeling.
Yeah, I have
another word for it.
I guess I have a similar story where through friends I get referred to be a content curator for a company that interviews celebrities and influencers in Thailand, and they wanted somebody to help these people get deeper insights, like get to the heart of the matter that what they wanted to share to the world. And I was like who, me? Like me, like, who am I? Wow. And then I showed up and I was like, oh yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay. I know how to listen and help these people get to the heart of the matter. And they asked me, well, your job here is done. Do you want to show up on the day of the shooting? And I said, yeah. And I said, what came out of my mouth was, because I will know if they're sharing from the heart or not. And you want these people to share from the heart, because I know when I can feel it.
Yeah.
And it was like one of those moments where I kind of watched myself say that, and I was like,
yeah. That's it.
I was like, that was pretty good, Nikon. Like, what else you got? I was like,
that's me when I'm doing counseling. I'll say something, go, wow, that's really true. Where'd that come from? It's like
I want to take notes, like
of this intelligence coming through you. And that's the carpet, the magic carpet. is just trusting in that more than your intellect.
If I were to tie all of this together, what it looks like to me now is thriving in the eye of the hurricane that's sitting on a big carpet, moving through the universe.
Yeah.
That's what and on a retreat, Michael Neal, he would say, like, you're always on, he called it an elephant. Like, but in this conversation, it's a carpet. So you're always on the carpet. Sometimes you just don't see it.
You forget it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
do too. And I want to tell you that, Nikon, that I forget it all the time.
Mhm.
And I'm an old timer, an original person. And the thing that hurt me most in the beginning was always comparing myself to other people and thinking I don't get it and not
Mm.
trusting the the beauty of making mistakes and the beauty of learning from rolling with the punches and all of the obstacles that life gives us are actually beautiful opportunities to be resilient in that moment, even though um, my life since before I learned the principles and after I learned the principles, I've still continued to have challenges. My parents died. I had problems with my teenage son at one point that was really disturbing. I had a business, my institute. Uh, I faced bankruptcy and I had to close it down. But out of that, it recreated it was just turning me in another direction. I wrote 4 more books. I, ended up becoming much more involved in consulting with organizations. But that time during that 10 years doing the Institute was perfect. It was a wonderful thing. There's no mistakes made there. It was just time. The carpet said it's time to move on. I fought it for a while because I thought, that meant I was failing or was
Right,
doing
right.
something wrong. But it wasn't. It was just moving me in a new direction that I never would have imagined. All the work I've done in healthcare and
Mm.
the traveling in India and all over the planet teaching the principles, I never would have done that because I would have been confined in that little bubble. So it's just trusting. Um, like Sid said, you write books, Joe, and I was told not to even go to college because of my poor writing abilities. And at age 40, I don't know how old you are. Uh,
35, yeah.
yeah, at age 40, a publisher came up to me while I was giving a talk and said, Joe, you need to write a book about this. And I said, oh, no, you got the wrong guy. I don't write. He
No.
says, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 I'll help you. I'll help you. And that was the Serenity Principle, my first book. And it still sells really well, helps help thousands of people around the world. And I didn't know, I didn't trust my ability to write. So when I sat down to write, I got back into my head to college days and how to do writing term papers, and it just wasn't flowing. And my wife said, "Well, why don't you write? What are you writing about?" I said, "Well, trying to write the, the foreword or the introduction." Well, why are you doing that? And I said, I don't know. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? She says, No. Why don't you write about what you feel inspired about? And I said, Oh, I hadn't thought of that. And then I went back and I wrote 17 pages the first day. It was just amazing. And before I knew it, I had a book. It was just,
Yeah.
how did that happen?
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I just had an insight. I realized I thought my problem in business was I didn't know enough or wasn't skilled enough. I realized I'm just really judgmental of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
And the beautiful thing
probably,
about that is there's nothing to do. I think Mavis Karn said it. You can't work harder at doing less. I can't work harder at not judging myself. I just need to just see that it doesn't really make sense to be so judgmental.
yeah.
And it's like being in the best car ride in the world and just complaining that
Mhm.
that I got a bad seat or something.
Yeah.
And I remember something Dr. Bill Pettit said about his wife who wrote poetry. It said it just came through her hands. It said, I don't know who's writing this, but it's just coming through me. And
Mhm.
that's what, when you share that story, that's what I hear. I'm like, something like Joe Bailey got out of the way for the thing that had to come through him to come through him. And to know
Exactly.
that that's always available, I think that's
Yeah.
incredible. infinitely helpful to everybody.
Yeah. I went and shot pool last night and with my friend, and came home, and my wife was sitting there in a pile of papers, and I said, "What?" Because she was going to proofread my book too, and I said, "Did you get any right?" Oh no! All of a sudden, I just started. Something came, and I wrote 17 pages. So she's a poet, and she's written thousands of poems, and they're just on little scraps of paper here and there and everywhere. And she really has taught me so much about riding the magic carpet ride, because she's just so trusting as an artist and just doing what she feels inspired. She doesn't ever plan anything that she writes or paints or draws. It just comes through her in that creative process.
Well, we're coming up on time, and I want to respect your time.
I
So,
believe probably,
right.
yeah.
So lastly, I would love for you to share, if you could give a gift to the world, to the people who are listening, what would that gift be?
The word that comes to me is the gift of self-acceptance.
Mm,
When you accept where you are, where whatever it is that if you're in the bottom of Skid Row, if you're dying, if you're in pain, if you can embrace and accept where you are and not judge it, you will transform.
mm, beautiful.
It's in the embrace of the present that you transform into the next step.
I love
And
that.
it's just so true, and what we do is we resist.
Mm,
One of my favorite quotes is, "What you resist persists.
mm-hmm.
What you embrace releases."
Oh, that's new. I've only heard the first part of that. I didn't hear the second part. I'm
I just
keeping
made
that.
it up. It just came to me.
That was great, John.
What did I say?
What did you say? Right. Oh, good thing we're recording this. What you embrace transforms, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. So I'm going to put all of your links in the description to your website and your podcast. The book comes out in October this year, and you can buy it on every platform: Amazon, Book Depository, and
You can pre-order it now.
you can pre-order it now, and I'll put the links to that too.
Okay.
And
Great.
thank you. This conversation was on Nikon's bucket list. So
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Nikon. I
thank
really
you.
appreciate you
And from my
time.
side and my vision, I guess I want you to know that this conversation is going to help me to articulate it in Thai to my communities, because that's my vision, to share this understanding in
Oh,
the Thai language to
that is just that warms my heart to hear that.
everybody. And
I have such good fond memories of Chiang Mai and all the different places that I've been in Thailand.
well, that's the vision, to get this understanding to all the provinces and as many people.
Oh, well, carry on. The message is going out to the world.
All right, so I'm going to stop recording. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah, it was fun. It's a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
Okay, bye.